So you have all been giving your talk about the Lean Startup way today, and I would say in very different forms and ways and from different backgrounds. So, but all very inspirational for me at least, and I'm sure by the applause that from anyone, from a lot of other people. Okay, so first question, and I'd like to ask Michael about this. How would you recommend enterprises to get started, and where should you start as an enterprise? I mean, how do you take this?
So I've seen quite a lot of enterprises starting working on these, and I think that the best way that I can phrase the successful ones are the ones that start with activities on the top and in the middle and on the broad, kind of at the same time, because you need the support from top. So the best thing that I've seen was when I was at eBay, we invited John Maeda to come, one of the design icons of Silicon Valley, to come and talk to us about the importance of design while the CEO was on stage, and bringing in Brian Chesky, the Airbnb CEO, who is also a designer, and tell that story in front of the full leadership of the company. That's a way to start. I've never seen anything as effective as what we did there.
Yeah, so seeing is believing, and when you see someone who tried this thing out, then you have the guts, you know, yes. You're motivated to.
And when you see your CEO and leadership inspired, and when they say, this is what we need to do, go and do that for me and for us. That's when a culture can start to pivot effectively.
Jyoti, you have something to add there?
Yeah, I think very much agree with that. I believe that the top layer and the middle layer, and also the folks that are working day to day, it's so crucial that it's a culture shift on all three levels. And I've seen it work at Starbucks, I've seen it work at Nordstrom, and in particular, what sponsorship does for teams that are working with them is they can create room. And I think room is what we need to be able to build innovation in software in these large enterprises. It's the ability to sort of be a little bit off the beaten path, not to have so much of the structure, because the reality is the customer defines that for us. And so when we were building some of the MVP experiences around the Starbucks app, we actually had a sort of satellite team where we were able to have a sponsor, our CTO at the time, Stephen Gillette, who's at Google X now. He said, sort of go off and build this, and let's iterate and make sure that you guys have the path, the green light, but you have to be able to show me that you're moving forward. And so it took that collaboration between our leadership and our team. And then ultimately, when we started shipping things, people got excited because it was new and changing. So to me, it really is that balancing act between both levels. Otherwise, one of them going doesn't actually help the other. And at Nordstrom, we have to always prove that what we're doing actually has a business revenue, but certainly a customer impact. And so that's what we're doing there as well.
And Klas, you have something to add here?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I totally agree. Where you see when it works the best, that is also what my experience is from how to get traction. However, when you look at very traditional companies, there is actually a situation in many companies today where middle management and senior management, they haven't got it yet.
Yeah.
And then my professional advice will be to everyone: don't wait on the lower levels. Then you have to start on lower levels to start learning and generate some traction. So you actually can use those proof points, as you said, to highlight to middle and top management, we are doing great things. Because otherwise you will always wait for the people above you to get it, and when they get it, it will be way too late in many cases. So that, I think, is the only aspect I would like to
That's true as well.
add on.
Agreed.
I'm waiting a little bit with involving you, Michael, because you don't believe enterprises can do this at all. But that's fair enough.
I believe, but they can't make magic out of it.
Exactly. It's the magic part. Okay. So Michael, what, in your opinion, what you have seen? So now we know how we should start, but what are the biggest challenges you have seen? You know, so like top 3 challenges you see in enterprise when they want to do this, they're motivated, and now what? What's the problems they run into?
So a lot of times I see the lack of actual capable, skilled people in the organization. So there's a lot of people who have done like read books and seen videos and maybe spent 1 or 2 days on courses, but they're not very good at it. So a lack of skilled people. So often what we've done, and I've seen the last year or so, is that we put in a mix of highly capable doers and then mix them in with the enterprise team, so that you actually get someone who gets it in the room, or get enough of them. So that's the one thing, to have enough skilled people in the room. And then that the whole kind of permission that we talked about before, that you often get started without the permission, and you get that whole political thing, so you have to do a little hide and seek and hide a little away at times. That's the other one, to make something that you're actually allowed to start showing and dare to show it, is another thing. I think those 2 are the most important ones. And then maybe trying to reach too far too quickly, and not building something that's small and still valuable for the company as showcases. So really keep it simple but valuable is the 3rd one.
So Jyoti, you said that at Nordstrom you had built 2 usability labs just next to the C-level offices.
Yes.
That they're in their face, so they could actually see this is going on, guys. You know, every day.
Sorry.
So can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah.
I mean, you put it there for a reason, so it must be because of a challenge. What do you see the main challenges?
So one of the main challenges is to recognize how the process even works for our leadership. So again, being a retail company for a long time, even just the process of bringing customers in and having them respond to experiences was new for our leadership. And so the number one thing was visibility. The visibility that this was something that we were doing, and it was in pursuit of the goals of the company. And I think because if you think about being in a store and working in a store, you interact with customers every second. You know, you're always trying to think about that. And as we kind of grow into our roles, you get sort of separate from the customer over time. And we certainly want to make sure that our leadership recognizes that we're thinking about this digital customer as well as the customer in the store. So the paradigm shift was really to try to get the organization to see this as an unlock for the future, but also recognize it's really what the company is all about anyway. So it was this nice moment. But I do think that the investment of doing it and really showing, like bringing them along the way through it, was something that was an active part of our principles of evangelizing what we're trying to do. So that was a capability through the UX team that we made our goal with our product team as well. Like, how do we bring in our leadership to showcase these experiences and teach them along the way? And that was how we sort of unlocked the opportunity to go into the store and do studies, go in home and do studies, and that value became crucial. And then to all of our points up here is when you start proving actual experiences, that's when the fodder kind of gets better. But we have, our leadership comes to the labs pretty regularly, you know, not every day, but they know it's happening. And I think that just gives them a sense, like, we are connecting with our customer. They are guiding the post of where we're doing, which is just what we do in the store anyway. So, like, reuniting it with the guiding principles of the company helps quite a bit.
Okay. Klas, you're the only one who had the notion Chief Digital Officer on your slide deck. I interpreted that as that's kind of a signal for an organization that they know now the digital change has to happen. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you see out there and how many of these that you see? You know, what's your view there on the team?
No, I think if I would be a little bit harsh, I could actually say when a company needs a chief digital officer, then the other executives have failed of actually embracing new technology as a part of their daily job. Because what you see today in many companies is actually that CDOs are being brought in to drive transformation over over some kind of period. And that actually means that the existing organization have had trouble of keeping up with what is happening in their own industry and also in competing industries, and potentially actually industries which a couple of years ago weren't even competing with them. And that is why the CDO role in many cases have developed quite rapidly. And linking this back also to the hurdles and some of the challenges, I can also see out of experience that one of the big challenges in getting this thinking into existing organizations is actually profits. That you earn a lot of money on your existing products and services. So you actually become a little bit complacent around that. And also that the majority of your executive time focuses on keeping and preserving those profits, which to some extent is absolutely right from a shareholder value perspective. But also linking it back to what I highlighted this morning, that is also about, from a business side, being able to be bimodal, keeping alive what you have today and maximize profit and customer value out of that, but also making sure you have the bandwidth internally to build for the future. And that is where these type of techniques become extremely valuable.
Okay, but today was not in particularly about how you could adopt lean startup at enterprises. So let's go back to the roots a little bit and talk about where it came from. And you, Michael, you didn't have anyone to convince about which method to adopt. But maybe you can elaborate a little bit about how you grew your organization from just you to where you are today, and the next 50 hires. What kind of people would that be? Maybe talk a little bit about organization.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it's a good point. I also had the pleasure to talk to some of the audience during the coffee break now, and kind of got some of the same questions around that. And I think it's really important. So initially, you're definitely in a mode where you just need the UI guy and then someone who can build the back end and make everything put together, and you can do that more or less garage way, and everything is simple. And then we grew the company to probably around 10, 15 people, adding sales, some of the finance functions and so on, like you usually do with companies. And you kind of get to the next step, because now you want to be more focused. You can see, first of all, you need to harden some of the products you have already. You need to add more people to that one. You need to ensure that the infrastructure runs more professionally and so on. And then you probably have some new ideas. You have this new thing coming. For us, it's like Ethereum coming in, or it could be a new product line that you want to build. And how do you do that? Because as soon as you go, even for a small company, you go to the tech people, to the CTO and the tech guys there, and they would immediately say to you, yeah, it's totally doable. We have so long list of priorities here, and we kind of, if you need to pick that one, you can't do the other one, and you can just feel already, even though you have an organization of 20 people, you can just feel this bottleneck, and kind of this you want to put everything into one platform idea. And that's where we kind of decided on one of the products we were launching to say, okay, we're doing this in another way. So right now we had everyone distributed, we had a team all over the world, and it was good, and it's good for our basis technology that we built that way. And then we choose to have product team and put them all in one office and say, now, a little bit other culture, you're going to do something different. You're essentially using all the stuff the other guys are doing, but you are building on top of that, so you put you in one room and you do something else now. And that's kind of changing some of the culture that way. At the same time, we also typically pick one or two of the people from the old culture and put into that team and ensure that they can cross-pollinate things that way and still have some of that there, but no restrictions around, oh, you need to use this kind of platform and you need to do it this way, everything needs to be Java, everything needs to be this and so on. We don't do this at all. And then from that team, we kind of, one of the individuals there, he were able to say, okay, we need to have something with Ethereum, and I can do a prototype for that one. Yeah, knock yourself out over the weekend, and he did. And then we could kind of have that product. We did that as a team by itself, so now it's a team by itself. It's still part of the basis layer, but it's going to be built in a different way. So we don't have any ties into the corporate thing that you need to do this and that. And I think that's really one of the important things we try to do. So essentially the only platform we have today is our socks. That's the same ones. And otherwise, the rest of the platform, even the IT, even we have nothing in common that way. So people would sit on Windows machines and other machines. We don't care. They have different phones. We don't care. They get a talk where they look deep in the eyes of the security responsible, and he tells them what to do and what not to do. But how they do it, it's up to them, and we're not going to mess with that. So we really try to not build an IT culture that's the same in the entire company, but just make room for spawning out fast teams that do something fast, and that essentially becomes innovation on the edge that way, even though we are still a small company, that's how. And then you asked about the next 50 hires, and again, definitely building out on that new team that is going to build a product there. And then I see growing the company or doubling the number of people to around 100 or so will be an effort where we need to add much more like of these staff functions and so on, and make all that layer much more solid in different ways. So we will see that we'll need like HR people and so on, and we haven't had that today. So that means I'm all the things that you don't have a title for, and I kind of look forward to not have to be the bottleneck there.
Okay. I also know that you don't have one office where everyone sits in.
No.
So let's all talk a little bit about that. You know, the physical organization of something of an organization that needs to be very innovative and very fast going. And you, Michael, how do you see the ideal setup there?
Yeah, so also I think that it's very hard to put everyone in one room, especially if you start growing. So I think that when you are at a 10-person company, it still works fine, but very soon you run out of talent in that place, or you need to be other places. So I think that finding a way that enables you to do let each team get empowered to do things on their own, and they have a sandbox that works really well for them, and they can work fast, is important. And then you need to build some kind of connective tissue throughout the organization that talks about how do we manifest our values, and how do we build on each other's learnings, so that you don't end up like a sleeper cells or guerrilla warfare where people don't even know who their colleagues are. So I still believe in this digital age that physical meetups in kind of between team members is important, and that's why I think that these sprints are so important, because it's highly valuable time and it's super expensive for the company, but you really need to go there and have the eye level and get the full collaboration started up with physical, and then you can go and do your thing on the distance from there.
And any views on, okay, if you had to choose between, not choose between, but you can either have everyone sitting at their own desk, maybe at home, you know, because you have a philosophy, we hire the best, and the best is not in one place, so we hire them where they are, and we assume they don't want to move, okay? As opposed to, let's hire them in the same city. Yeah. And having one office where they might come sometimes or not, or at least we have these meetings. I mean, what would your ideal way of doing this if you were going to drive a startup?
And well, I just would never do a startup that consists of people that sit all over the place. It's so hard to make people, to create a shared culture if you are not kind of physically connected. But of course, you need to be able to accommodate to specialists that are so scarce that you will have to hire them no matter where. But it's super important that they're together, especially in the startup. You form the culture of the company, and if the culture is formed being absence, we don't care. Then it's really hard to get to there later. So it's very critical to get the culture right from the beginning, so you can grow from there.
I disagree with that.
Very good, Michael, because now you have to, because I knew.
That comes from the corporate guy, and it's really interesting to see the
Let's talk
changes.
about how you did it.
Yeah, so essentially we, from the beginning, none of us were sitting together at all. So we met, of course, and I knew Jan already, and we've been like on the phone and different channels for a long time. So I think that we are kind of, even though I'm too old to claim that, I still feel like millennial generation that way, and would say that, well, if I look at my kids today, they're not together. So you could say, like, how can you have friends when you're not together? And that's kind of what I typically see. So when I was a kid, I was playing on a road, and we were playing football and other stuff. We might meet and sit together and do something more nerdy and so on. And what they do today, they're online and they're together. So this mode of thinking and this mode of working, you can actually build culture. And the people that they meet when they then meet, they actually have the same culture. You can see it immediately. So you kind of build a culture that way. And we did that from the beginning. So everyone was distributed. We had like this philosophy that we would distribute everyone. And then one guy, he lived in Copenhagen, he asked me, can I have an office? And I said, yeah, well, we can get an office then. If you want that, then we can sit there together and it's fine. And then we sat like 2 people in one office, and now we are like 7, 8 people in that office, but they're all like in different teams. We're still together, but I still feel that the connection, just this virtual connection, and when we all of us meet, you can just see that we hired the same people. So they're like, culture-wise, really, really the same. So I think you can actually build culture even though you're remote, especially today. And I would say that looking at the younger generation today, that's what they're doing, all of them. And then I think there's one funny thing. So when I get this question typically, and how can you do this? How can you manage people that way? I typically say, have you ever tried to go into a room full of developers? They are all virtual. They're not there. They sit with headphones on and 2 screens in front of them, and they communicate over Slack, even though they're in the same room, because it works better, and they kind of can stay in the zone. And what's important for them is silence, or kind of the zone, and that's cool. And I want to respect that, so it means, for me, it's not, and I did that at Kraken as well. We had one guy driving in from Mountain View every day, and I told him, stop doing that. You don't need to be in the office. You can stay at home. I know how you sit. You can do things much better that way. And he could just stay there instead of going to San Francisco, and it worked fine. So I think you can do it. I think when the challenge is typically having a lot of people in one spot, and then the satellite becomes second-rate citizens, and you don't really want that to happen. So you kind of need to say in one team, the distributed, the other team is here, and that's fine. But otherwise, I think you can actually build it quite well.
It also depends what you want your culture to be able to do, because what we were doing these, doing co-creation sessions and teaming up and going to see and empathize with customers. It's just hard to do at home in front of your screen.
So we have a big travel budget, so we definitely need to meet. But most of the time we don't, so it means typically they do like a team setup, they launch a project, they sit together 3 days, then they're back home again, and then 3 months later they're doing it again. So
Sure.
Okay. Klas?
And I will bring the large corporation hat on these type of aspect, because it has 2 dimensions. I mean, number one, when you're doing these type of techniques in a large organization, sometimes you actually need to move people out instead of moving them in. So actually taking them from the large corporate facilities and offices and moving them to new areas where, for example, you have a number of startup factories and so on, so that they get energized around the new thinking, because that's an infusion of new type of culture. At the same time, when you bring in new people, in many cases from startups or from other type of industries, then they know what to do around these techniques and so on. However, then it's important for them to get a notion about the culture and the leadership in the organization they try to impact, because otherwise they will always be electrons moving in the wrong direction, and that will not be helpful long-term wise. So those are also two aspects of this location aspect with regards to getting traction.
Now, many enterprises, they actually make these off-site companies where they hire for these organizations and take them out of the normal surroundings.
Yeah, and I participated a couple of weeks ago for one of the big companies here in Denmark, and actually they have now a separate house. Of course, they call it Silicon House across the street. And the first sign you see there when you get in, now you're entering into a process-free zone.
Oh my goodness. And I'm pretty sure the coffee is better there, right?
No, but they have a lot of cola.
I think that I'll actually warn a little bit for the like, especially for the enterprises. I've seen a lot of times where enterprises, they try in a kind of in an attempt to kind of spark their culture, they create a zone and they kind of put it there, and immediately you get this not invented here ivory tower that those people over there think they're better than us, and it's just really very, very strong tension. And I would only say do it as a part of a project, as a way to go forward to something that's more integrated. because it's really, really not very accommodating for the culture.
But the fascinating part around this organization, for confidential reasons, I will not mention the name. However, the interesting part is that the ownership structure around this organization have never bothered one single minute around digital or IT solutions for this organization. But once now this house was created, you have 10-ish people from the outside sitting there, 10-ish people from the internal organization, both IT, digital, and business, sitting there. All of a sudden, 2 of the main shareholders wanted to come and visit them and see what they were doing. So all of a sudden, you get true traction on top level in order to understand what digital and new type of solutions will do for them. So all of a sudden, that actually catalyst for actually management change in that organization. But I totally agree with you, over time.
But that's also part of a project then, right?
Absolutely.
So, or process, you say. We have a process step that's about sponsorship and senior level engagement, and creating a showcase for that can be super valuable.
Sure.
And getting someone to kind of employ them over there and for a while works fine. But year 2 and year 3 is not so rosy as year 1 on these projects.
I was, just to kind of make a note on that, I was working at Microsoft, I can't remember the year, but it was the year that Xbox Live launched, and I was at Xbox. And to your point, they put us all in a separate campus, because Microsoft, is known for servers and all the technology, but was it known for gaming? And it also was a draw for talent, right? So that's the other part of it, is that creating that environment of like a startup separate physically from the larger location made us all feel like we were part of a startup within the company, which was really interesting. And it drew a lot more talent to it, right? And then, like you said, there was a connection from the sponsorship level at the top, but there was a lot of freedom to go ahead. I think the challenge, and I wasn't there when it kind of got pulled back in, that's the challenge, is how do you take everything you learned in that group, shipping things really fast, doing virtual experiences that you can do in gaming, and pull that in. So that's where the opportunity is. But we've done that at Starbucks. We're trying to do some of those things at Nordstrom as well. We're lucky at Nordstrom because most of our team is physically close by. But again, to your point, do you actually go by the talent or the city? To me, it's talent. It always has to be about the talent. And so we're trying to figure out ways to make it much more effective where people are in different locations. And to your point, I think when you actually start with a vision and you have a set of guiding principles around your culture and you infuse that with the people you hire, that's what you need, those cultural advisors, and that would be obviously yourself. But then you have a few of those connectors that can sort of go into that dev room and just be like, okay, guys, are we back on our 3 pieces of our mission? And that's how you kind of invigorate the culture. And that's what we try to do, at least.
Okay, so let's stick around the startups where it all started. So Klas, maybe you will begin with your experience. I know you haven't done a startup yourself, but you have a lot of experience from your life. In your opinion, if you had a startup idea, how would you go about it? I mean, what is the top 5 things you would make sure to do right?
Yeah, and order. I mean, since I'm more of a corporate guy, and having facilitated those startup ideas in a large organization, and in that aspect, what I have seen working is actually to try initially, at least, to ring fence some of those people in order for them to get enough space to be able to flourish. Because if you don't give them space and try to get their idea into the traditional corporate thinking about return on investment business cases, I mean, it's dead before it's even left the drawing board. So that, I think, is ring fencing is the number 1 aspect. The other aspect is also to actually see, does it have a link to your existing type of services, or is it a free idea that eventually will be a spin-out? That is also something to consider quite early, because if there is a strong linkage to what you're doing today, then you also need to plan how to integrate it at some point into your existing services or products and similar. And then I think also the third aspect, use that as a platform to drive engagement around the organization, a great place to be, get fantastic talent to be a part of those type of events. Because that is also an opportunity to promote people both internally to be part of those initiatives, but also a great magnet to attract talent from the outside into what people might actually perceive to be a little bit of boring industries. So those are three aspects from my side.
So Michael, besides sense of urgency, and I guess that comes with not having, that you know you don't have too many resources, and you know that you have competitors out there. So can you name like a handful of other things you would do if you had to start a startup today?
Yeah, so I think that again, I would definitely do a lot of things exactly the same way. I think it's really a matter about you need to get the right people, talented people that can kind of work more or less by themselves and understand the vision of the company quite well. I think that again, the sense of urgency. I think there's something around culture and Europe and culture in US, and it's definitely good to have that injection from US, either from the West Coast or from the East Coast. And if you don't really have that in the company, you easily get into a mode where you just want to like build something that can get acquired instead of aiming for something that's a little bit higher than that. So I think that's really important to really get that mindset and find that drive and ensure that you aim high all the time. So I think that's really interesting. I think also when you kind of look at the setup for the enterprises, and now we like talking startups, but still if you look at the enterprises and why you need to separate these things out to some extent, is that you're looking at completely different organizations. So one organization might be like, have a huge return of like a huge revenue, but they might only be growing like 3% year over year. And the other, they have like a ridiculously small revenue, but they're growing 3x every year. And this means that when you're talking revenue goals in the small company, the other one's like, come on, guys, you're talking millions here, you're talking hundreds of K? What are you talking? You just closed a deal of $5,000. What do you mean? This is not a success. This is like ridiculous. But when they're doing that, they know that next year it's going to be 3 times as much, and in like 4 years, it's 100 times as much. So it means that it suddenly becomes very meaningful to talk about a contract of $5,000, because that might actually be very big in a few years. And the big corporate, they're like thinking about huge numbers, but small growth. And I think that's kind of these cultures, you can't really put them in the same room. They need to be split apart, otherwise they would just clash.
Jyoti?
Yeah, so I've been a part of a lot of different startup-like experiments in enterprises, and what has been effective is really, again, figuring out what is the problem from a customer perspective we're trying to solve. I think a lot of the things that have failed that I've been a part of have no connection back to the actual user. So that's one thing. In the enterprise opportunity, I've been lucky because a lot of these, again, have been separated. I mean, not separated so far that you aren't connected to the mothership, but separated enough that you have funding, you have sponsorship, and you have the ability to fail. So I'm not going to admit that when we first launched the Starbucks app, we launched a perfectly, fine piece of software. It had a lot of kinks, issues, and our customers communicated about what those issues were. But we had some room because we recognized that it was something new that we'd never done before. And it was because our leader was actually very technically savvy and understood that this was a new market for us to jump into. And to your point about, like, it starts off really small. A lot of the assumptions and hypotheses that we had about it in the beginning completely were wrong, right? And so in order for us to fail quickly, we had to test it. The challenge, we were testing it in the live world. There was no usability testing. It was like you ship it out and everybody's going to basically tell you with app reviews and downloads and things like that. So for me, it's really about the customer value and the promise, and then taking that and having the ability to market it and put it into the hands of the customer, and like the organization being open to the fact that you're going to have these ebbs and flows. I've certainly had the calls from the leaders saying, hey, this is making news, this is not the right approach, and then you always have to be able to say, well, this is our guiding principles, this is what we need to go after. But it takes some amount of tenacity and the ability to have people around you that will sponsor you through those challenging moments.
And I think, to your point, which I think is excellent, and that is also about an important leadership skills in this journey, and that is actually to set the expectations early on for senior leaders. What now will happen once we release this? Because in many, if you look larger enterprises, then you have a standard for quality, feedback, or product aspects, which in a startup environment or when you launch new stuff in the lean thinking way, then you will not have the same principles. And that is important to communicate so people are aware of what we might see when we now launch this.
I'd also like to add, so completely agree. I'd like to add just a couple of observations. So I've been kind of following, sponsoring, doing kind of advisory for experience for several startups lately, and this summer I'm supporting this fintech company, and I learned two things that I think is important to bring in. The first one is that the story of what this product is and what it wants to be in the world is extremely important to phrase in a way that everyone around the table actually are able to talk it and also share it. So I'm currently directing a little video that we're having a studio make, even though it's such a small little company. So that's the first one, storytelling, to figure out what the hell we're doing, and to get people to start walking in the same direction, especially when there's so few. The second one is to become profitable, or to start to make profits way before you actually think you're ready, so that you start to do this. The MVP is not something that's far away in the distance. You have to figure out what are ways that we could actually start to convert just a little bit, because otherwise you spend all your funding money in a dream, and then the reality just hits you like a hammer. So figuring out what are ways that we could get profitable, and definitely talk about the $5,000 and even 500, because you have to celebrate every time you make money as a startup, no matter how little it is.
Yeah, and I think that's really a good point around profitability, not profitability, but kind of making profit. And I think that's really, at least if you're in the B2B segment, if you can ensure that your customers are always paying, they never get a free demo, they're always paying, even like it's ridiculously small amount, but they actually had to put in their credit card, or they actually had to do something there. It means that for them, they're actually testing your product with their money, and they actually want something back. And those who you give it for free, if it's not interesting, they're just not testing it. They're just like out. They're not there. You're not getting any feedback. And the other ones, you get feedback. Even churn is a good feedback. That kind of tells you that was not the thing you should do. And I think that's actually very important. So always ensure you get profit somehow.
I also learned from a good friend and successful entrepreneur that he said, you really need to charge your clients as quickly as possible, because in that way, when you really need to charge them bigger money, then you are already through the procurement process. That can take 6 months or a year.
Yeah.
So as long as they just pay $1,000, you know that there's a path made for you. Okay, so to you, Michael, and you can add in if you dare, about investors. I mean, because I know you have been very thoughtful about what kind of investors you could bring in at different times, and also how much you would expect from these different kind of investors. Can you kind of take us through this, the business angels, the seed rounds, the ABC, what it means to a startup?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, unless now I'm kind of from Danish background, that means that typically you don't have, you're not used to save up money, and that means that you need a business angel. If you're in US, you're used to save up money, at least for your kids' education. You might take some of that and use it for your startup and so on. So you have that opportunity. We're not catered that way in Denmark, and I think that's probably wrong. But again, so you need money from business angels. That's kind of how you ensure that you can still pay your mortgage and you can still kind of survive in a reasonable way the first year or so, or how long are you going to last. I think the next step you're going into is kind of the seed money, and when you get into the seed money stage, you want to show that you have actually built a product. Ideally, you want to have a revenue, because that could kind of get you further in that process. And then I think until you get the seed money, everything is extremely much fringe. You just really need to survive the next day. You'll be like days where you don't get paid. There'll be like all kind of funny scenarios to get things done. As soon as you have the seed money, you need to kind of say, this amount of funds need to get us somewhere. It actually needs to professionalize everything. You need to ensure everyone are really paid and so on, and actually have things professionalized that way. In terms of investors, I think that in the seed round, the most important thing there is probably that you find someone that can kind of help you in the A round as well, kind of help you in terms of follow-on money that might sometimes be interesting as well. But also you need to find someone with some connections and a drive. And also, I think what we found in our seed investor, Point 9, they're like, we are a software as a service company, and they're like extremely tough on the KPIs. And that means that you like have the KPIs, you need to go for this one, you kind of measure yourself all the time, and that's been extremely helpful, I think. So that's really been some of the kind of culture we got back from those. And now that we are about to close an A round, we more or less look for investors that really have a sense of what's the pulse of the world, who can kind of bring us like way further ahead and actually have the right mindset around the table, people who have built huge billion-dollar companies before that actually know how this process works and been there from the very beginning. And I think that's where we are aimed right now, and I think that's really a very interesting step, and it's also going to be a lot of more work, of course, but that's just how it is. And I think that's really interesting, the next step there. So I think that's really the next part. And again, you could go for something else. We could definitely do that as well in our company. We could just find money anywhere, and you wouldn't get kind of that push in the back. You wouldn't be strapped to a rocket afterwards. You would kind of just be able to do it from revenue and grow a little bit slower, and that would be all fine. But again, we come from a vision. We actually want to move somewhere, and that's why we want to go there fast.
Any comments from you regarding investors? At Gartner or at Volvo, did you also act as investors, and what did you think about that? I mean...
No, I mean, in the corporate life, you have it a little bit different, because you can actually say you have investors.
You have investors, yeah.
But in the corporate life, they provide facilities, they provide salaries, and that structure you talk about, you actually get it from them.
Yeah.
So you potentially actually need to treat them in a little bit of a similar way.
Yeah, except for one thing that you miss out on in the enterprise world, and I think that's kind of important as well, and it might be the reason for the magic, and that's ownership.
Absolutely.
Because none of the people in an enterprise actually have ownership, like real ownership. It's actually my products, even like 1% or 5% or 50% or whatever. It's not really there. So it's a job. And that's where sometimes the coffee becomes more important than the actual work. Like that's where you have like the good cantinas and so on. But at the end of the day, you really want to motivate people by some kind of ownership. And I think that's also where I think that the magic is part of the startup. Is like, you have ownership, it's your baby, you kind of want to make it grow because it's yours. And that's really the important side, I think. So that's where it gets different in terms of enterprise.
And that is also what you see in research, that many companies today that really find something go also out in JV structures.
Yeah.
Just to get that drive and momentum.
Yeah.
That has also been a part in my professional life, but equally what we see in Gartner, that many organizations, when they find that a little bit blurry section, go out, find external investors, because then you get a totally different traction.
Totally, yeah.
I'd also like coming from this from the lean UX side, I'd just like to add one thing that basically you need to be able to speak to the investor in language that they understand. And what I find really important is to be able to phrase the problem. So instead of only talking to investors about all the solutions that you have in this world, which very often happens especially in the tech industry, I've had experiences with saying, well, let's try to phrase and get really strong about the problem and the customer, and then try to sell an infatuation of what those problems the customers have. And if we can create a premise that they are investing in the solution, in solving the problem rather than the solution that you came about, I think you have a more healthy startup, start with that sponsor there.
Yeah, and at the same time, you also enable them to invest in your competitor. Because they believe in like the problem now. And that's kind of, we have seen that as well. So it's a danger, but at the same time, I totally agree, that's what you need to do.
Yeah. Okay. We have 5 minutes left. Thank you all for your participation and insight so far. Do we have any questions from the audience?
We have a question from the app that I can ask. Yes. It reads, incentive plans, PowerPoints, and loads of middle management afraid of losing their stakeholder ticket often sends innovation workshops to dev/null. Very common in huge legacy industries. What concrete drastic actions do you recommend for these places?
You all understood the question?
Yeah.
More or less?
Can you repeat it?
Once more?
Let's repeat the question.
The question was, incentive plans, PowerPoint, and loads of middle management afraid of losing their stakeholder ticket often sends innovation workshops to null. Very common in huge legacy industries. What concrete drastic actions do you recommend for these places?
Klas, would you...
Oh, thank you for that one.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but I think it actually links back to what I said earlier on. When you have industries which are hugely successful and earning huge profit in their normal business, and then all of a sudden you actually try to convey into something new that will be your big cash flow and profit generator for the future. That mix is troublesome, absolutely. What I've seen and what I know that our research shows is actually organizations that split it out. For example, having both product organizations that actually move into taking products into your geographical dimension, and then new global services organization that actually being measured differently. So you actually get the matrix organization, but still catered in the same organization, but then managed very differently. And there are very good examples of industries managing and companies managing like that. One fantastic company who is truly generating a lot of profit and customer satisfaction on classical products is a company called Assa Abloy. And actually in Denmark, for example, Ruco is one of those brands, where they are handling both very, very classical products and then on a global scale, truly software-based products. And by splitting it out like that, they are able to handle both. So I think that is a few of those examples at least.
I also heard that maybe this was a case of if you have a frustration in the company where you are now and you want to work with something and you don't really think it's done in the right way, then there's always the opportunity to take it to another place. You know, maybe you should make a startup about that.
Mm-hmm. There is always an opportunity. Either you execute or you evacuate. Yeah.
Well, I can also say that something as simple as figuring out how to get the story to kind of permeate. I remember we did a workshop in a super conservative company, and I had this okay, they're not really ready for us, but let's figure out what to do. So we made these big roll-ups and taped customers expressing their actual problems, and I put it on repeat. And we put it into got a spot at the reception next to the canteen, and we just had it run there for a while and make some work for us, because we needed to get some of that customer sensitivity back into the game to change the odds a little bit. So there are things you can do. You just have to be a little creative about it.
Yeah. Okay. A final question? Good. We also exactly used up all our time. So thank you all for coming, and thank you for your insights.